Pumapunku divides the world into two camps: those who see the ancient Bolivian site merely as evidence of a pre-Inca culture, and those who recognize it as stone proof of the existence of extraterrestrials. But why is this complex of all places so strongly suspected of having been created by beings who literally do not come from this world? Can the astonishingly precisely crafted monumental structures of Pumapunku really only have been created with extraterrestrial help? Or should we perhaps better admit that we're not as technically superior to our ancestors as we like to claim? If you want to see the archaeological site of Pumapunku with your own eyes, you need a lot of stamina. After all, at 3,850 meters above sea level, the air can confidently be described as thin. Part of Pumapunku, Pumapunku, is located in the Altiplano Plateau near Lake Titicaca, and thus officially belongs to an artificially created platform hill. But a quick glance at its terraced layout, its equally ingenious and massive canals, and not least its imposing monumental structures, which have long since been destroyed, proves that this description does not really do justice to the genius behind the creation of the complex. And yet, it is not only the dizzying height, we are talking about one of the highest urban centers in the world, that makes Pumapunku so unique. No, because the architecture used here has no known precedent in the entire Andes. And while the corresponding stone blocks were so intricately crafted that they are a mystery even to modern stonemasons, we cannot even say with absolute certainty who created the site in the first place. In fact, the relevant specialist text reports on several different cultures that used Pumapunku as a religious and political center between 1500 BC and 1200 AD. In this regard, experts assume that the Pumapunku state existed for about 2,000 years. And during this time, as it developed southeast of Lake Titicaca, it probably reached an extent of over 500,000 square kilometers in its heyday and provided a home for around 500,000 people. And in view of these dimensions, it is practically obvious that the Pumapunku culture has not only immortalized its heritage in Pumapunku, in fact, this ancient people also managed to develop effective irrigation systems that covered an area of more than 80 square kilometers and ensured the stable cultivation of essential crops such as potatoes, corn, and quinoa. It seems that the Pumapunku culture suddenly disappeared around the year 1000 AD, and we don't know the definite answer to the question of what led to this abrupt demise. One theory is based on the assumption that the culture succumbed to a severe drought, and since its members were no longer able to maintain food crops as a result, the community fragmented and eventually sank completely into the shadows of the past. The mystery of the H-blocks. A different century, the same mystery. While the architectural wonders of Pumapunku are still shrouded in many questions to this day, the Spanish conquistadors also wondered how the stone monuments could be hewn out of the ground at all. Specifically, the Spaniards in the 16th century simply could not explain how such massive stones could be transported and then shaped into such extraordinary forms. The fact that the situation is not much different in its basic features over 500 years later is again due to the fact that Pumapunku no longer has anything to do with its original appearance. And by that, we really mean nothing. Since Pumapunku is one of the most looted and destroyed sites in all of South America, none of the monolith blocks are still in their original place. In fact, the structures were only rebuilt afterwards, and some historians estimate that this has only further deepened the architectural mystery. There was simply no basis for the reconstruction, and it would have been a very big coincidence if the efforts of modern times had hit the exact core of antiquity. But even if we leave aside the correct arrangement of the structures for a moment, one thing is indisputable. Many components of Pumapunku and Pumapunku seem so mysterious that they immediately leave us with raised eyebrows. Take a closer look at the so-called H-blocks. As the name suggests, they are shaped like the letter from which they take their name. However, they also have ridiculously straight edges and are sometimes exactly 1 meter high. In view of this, the alternative camp wonders whether these mysterious testimonies were really only made with primitive hand tools, or whether some kind of laser cutting technology was not used after all. By the way, pre-astronauticists like Erich von Daniken also think they know exactly who brought our ancestors the corresponding technologies, but more about that in a moment. In any case, it is clear that the H-shaped blocks of Pumapunku are no exception. No matter where we look, we are met with amazing stone carvings that testify to the extraordinary skills of their creators. And while the so-called arrow stones or the blocks with the typical Andean crosses also amaze us, we must not forget that some of the structures are gigantic. For example, the researchers at Pumapunku have already discovered a monolith that is over 7.8 meters long and weighs an incredible 130 tons. In this regard, the material analysis has shown that the Colossus was brought from a quarry 10 kilometers away. But how exactly did people accomplish this hundreds of years ago? Well, even the experts can only offer theories in this regard, but it is thought likely that a combination of ramps, ropes, and sheer muscle power was used. The work of aliens? Oh yes. But what about the image on the Tiwanaku Sun Gate, which clearly shows an alien and thus proves that the inhabitants of ancient times were regularly visited by extraterrestrial intelligences? Well, a dyed-in-the-wool pre-astronaut would probably react to these of conservative historians in one of these ways or another. As already briefly mentioned, the not entirely uncontroversial author and alternative researcher Eric von Daniken is firmly convinced that the Sun Gate does not show us a figure on a pedestal, as is commonly claimed, but an extraterrestrial being floating in a spaceship. But that's not all. The inscriptions on the gable of the structure also would leave no doubt that the creature once came to Earth on board a flying saucer. However, the other side emphasizes that this interpretation is absolutely far-fetched and lacks any serious basis. Despite all this, however, von Daniken's followers continue to believe that what is written in our history books has nothing to do with historical reality. After all, there is a reason why so many different cultures of the past had a cult of the gods that revolved around heavenly beings who revealed higher knowledge to the inhabitants of the earth. As you can probably already guess, these gods are said to have been extraterrestrial in the flesh. But since our ancestors were unable to explain the futuristic technologies of their visitors, they were simply given a supernatural background. This 3D model aims to put an end to alien speculation. But now we find ourselves in the comfortable situation of being able to examine the mysteries of days long gone in a completely different way. And so it came about that a group of scientists from the University of California in Los Angeles set out to create the first 3D model of Pumapunku, and in doing so, to verify whether the site is really as unusual and unique as is often said to be. Before they could do that, however, the researchers had to gather all the information about Pumapunku that had been collected over the last 150 years. With the help of notes, descriptions, images, and finds, the experts reconstructed almost everything that had been discovered about the site so far, and, according to them, provided clear evidence that the claims of the pre-astronautians are false. After all, the final, true-to-scale 3D print shows that Pumapunku does not really break with tradition as dramatically as previously assumed. Quite the opposite. In their study, the researchers demonstrated that the design used here can even be found in 2 other nearby sites. But how could the researchers be so sure? Because just like Tiwanaku, Pumapunku was also devastated beyond repair in the course of the past, and as already mentioned, we don't actually know of any other example in the entire Andes region that we could use for orientation. Well, sometimes the solution to the puzzle is simply called intuition. After the experts had made the 150 individual parts of the site, their size, shape, and thickness practically showed by themselves how they had to be put together correctly. And where the tactile nature of the components met the intuitive inspiration of the experts, a kind of 3D puzzle was created that finally showed Pumapunku in its original form. Well, that's true for one side at least. Whether von Daniken and company would also let themselves be converted by this, to put it casually, scientific tinkering session is, of course, a completely different matter. It's also a completely different question as to why you haven't clicked on the subscribe button yet. I'm happy to make up for that now, and you'll never miss a new video from us again in the future. See you soon!